different because every time I say the same thing, I was like,
You
girl, let's mix
do.
it up.
You do.
Let's get mixy.
It
Look, I
gets
said hola this week.
it gets difficult to mix it up sometimes, but also you don't always have to reinvent the wheel, right? Like sometimes, you have the way you open up something or close it, and people get used to that. And I think that's okay. But I think for us doing it, I'd be like, all right, like try to say the same
Y'all
thing.
should hear y'all should hear us trying to cut clips and like re-listen to the episode. We're like, oh my God, stop talking.
That's bad. But as long as you guys keep listening, that's what matters. I was having a conversation today, actually, Carlie, with our friend Cynthia, and she was talking about, well, really, we were talking about what it takes to cultivate a community. We were talking about like with our friend who was DJing, and then she was like, yeah, I noticed like even with Carlie's couch, like every once in a while I'll see like somebody I'm cool with or I'm following post something from y'all, and I'm like, yeah, I don't even know sometimes, who the folks are listening or leaving comments. You know how you can tell when folks like really listen and are really into it. And so we were talking about how interesting it is that, cultivating a community, sometimes it's easier for it to be like people outside of your regular circle, and, for new people to get into it, etc. So definitely appreciate all of you listening and all of you who have become a part of our community, and want to encourage you to keep sharing the podcast as well.
Yeah, please do. I love when people are like, oh, I listened to it, or me and my cousin had a great conversation about, whatever y'all were saying. The funniest thing that I get all the time is like, they'll be like, anybody who I'm talking to, and it's been from like clients at the gym to people in other circles, they're like, yeah, but I agree with Lex though on what she was saying. Like, I felt like I was more in her thing, and I'm just laughing. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. That's why I'm glad we're different. Because then people can kind of connect with different trains of thought, and kind of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I
But
feel like Carlie and I, like, we have similar views on a lot of things, might just be different approaches, and or I think there is maybe like a spectrum of like being realistic to hopeful or optimistic. I don't know what exactly the words would be, but that on what with that, I'm like more on another side than you sometimes.
oh, absolutely. We're like, but it's good because I think it's a good balance for that, which is actually why I'm kind of excited that we're revisiting our talk on expectations. And I wanted to re-talk about them because I feel like lately in all of our episodes, we're like, oh, but we need to make sure to manage our expectations. And like everything we've been talking about, from listening to the way that we speak to trust and building trust and being vulnerable in relationships and different things. And it keeps on coming back into this whole idea of like managing your expectations.
Yeah. Um, I think that there's so many ways that we can have less hurt, sadness, pain, all of those things based on our perceptions, based on our perspective, based on, kind of how much we want to choose to hold on to things. So I'm talking about like our attachment and, mindset. And I think expectations kind of fall similarly into that group, to where it is something where if you can really take ownership of the way that you set up your expectations, it can definitely relieve you of a lot of like pain and stress that may be unnecessary. But I also think it's interesting too, like, the world is so a lot. And oftentimes people do, like, they underachieve or they hurt you or they do things, right? So one thing I guess with our podcast is like, I want to make it clear that I understand, and I know Carlie does too. We recognize like that things happening to you, like when we talk about like how what we can do about the thing, what we can manage, is not to diminish or invalidate like that things do happen to you, or that you do have reason to feel upset about stuff. And at the same time, I know it's like, man, if I just managed and paid better attention to the boundaries of when those expectations were not met. So it's like a two-piece, that, man, I would have been so much better off. But I don't know. Unfortunately, I feel like we also always see these things after the fact, instead of during, which is so hard, which maybe that could be another episode too. Is like, how can you just like cut yourself off from things? How can you better enforce your boundaries? But there's so many also topics within that. So yeah, managing your expectations, I think, is a huge way that you can also manage your feelings, manage how you're feeling about things, the way they get done, the way you're being treated, or whatever it might be. So it's very important because I know in my past, like anytime I've had very high expectations, a lot of times it was me creating them instead of it being an agreement between folks. So I think that's a big part of it for sure, is that how often are you just having like this fantasy of what you think will happen or what you want to happen, and you're the only one who said that? Or even worse, when you're having those high expectations with a person, whether it's work, relationship, whatever, but who has already shown or even expressed straight up to you, like, yeah, I'm not really about to do all that. And then you still have expectations, and it's like, all right, sis, at this point, we got to manage them. So I'm a big fan of managing your expectations as often as I like don't actually manage them. So keep that in mind too. Like, we be knowing what to say, but I don't always do that for sure. But it's something I can always come back to often to like recalibrate.
No, I think that that's great. And it's so funny. You actually answered my first question when I was thinking about expectations and like what it actually looks like in practice to manage them. Because I'm not great either. Like I'm definitely on the hopeful scale and I sure be
Mhm.
having high expectations and be getting let down. So this is coming from a place of learning. But my question was, where do people run into issues with expectations? And from what you just said, it sounds like by not communicating them with the other person.
Because we're scared to communicate them a lot of times too, right? Like, I think oftentimes it's a crazy combo, not crazy, but it's a dangerous combo to have high expectations and also being scared to like say what you wanted or saying like what you are hoping for as well. So like, I don't know if you recognize that, but I feel like I'm just kind of recognizing that those two things tend to go together. Um, to where it's like, oh, I didn't actually communicate, and or part of communicating is listening. I didn't listen to what you said. You know what I mean? Like you're just on your own program. And oftentimes we, like I say, will write this story, a whole story of how we want things to go or how we hope it goes, which I think it's fine to have that desire, I guess. But then like, to me, managing your expectations means let me be present and pay attention to what's actually happening, what somebody's actually doing, what somebody's actually
Mm-hmm.
saying. Um, and I can only do that if I'm like here and not like trying to think of before in the future, or trying to think about the past with what happened before or whatever else. Um, so yeah, I think the communication is super important, but often we don't want to do that because then we're scared that that's going to get shot down too, and so we have a high expectation that then gets shot down anyway. So it's a whole lot of heartache you can save yourself if you would just communicate and have some real expectations.
Man, I didn't know this was gonna turn into a therapy session, but here we are. Um, Not communicating, but being scared. Oh my gosh, that's probably a whole other episode topic about being like not wanting to get let down, like
Mhm.
not wanting to be disappointed. But in the end, it becomes a cycle because you're not communicating it. You still have high expectations. So you end up like getting disappointed anyways. And so
Mhm.
it's better to just speak them. And so I would say that's probably where I struggle with them the most is the not wanting to get let down part. So then I don't actually end up asking for what I want a lot of times. And that's like any story I think about where there has been a mismanagement of expectations, it's always been around me being too scared to like say something. And then I end up getting hurt.
Hmm. But so is it wrong to have expectations that have not been communicated?
I don't think so. I think some expectations are unspoken. So like being treated with respect, like kindness, like in relationships, like not raising your voice or calling me names or cursing at me, like
Mhm.
different things I think that are not communicated, but like and expected. And I guess it's an expectation, so that's whatever. But I feel like anyone where it includes someone else's attention, time, and investment of their money and whatever is going on, like that should be agreed upon. And should be understood. Like, hey, we're gonna do a dinner date every Friday. Like date day is Friday is ours, any other day, whatever. But every Friday we're gonna do a thing. You can't just think that and then not include a person because we all
Mm,
have our own lives and are building businesses, and so that's completely unfair. But it's like if we agreed on that and then it doesn't happen, like that's a whole different conversation.
yeah. Yeah, or like an unspoken like expectation just in general, like that we would go on, at least to have a date every week, or like that you would even want to do certain things. Like everybody doesn't think like that, or they may be in the house, or so for sure that has to be something I think that you speak up about. But I do think that the only maybe not only, because as I speak this out I might contradict myself, but expectations that you can have and like they're enforced is because you have some type of spoken agreement, or like that you discuss this, right? Like I have a particular expectation of the people who work with me because they have an agreement within which it says like, hey, things like if I can't come to the weekly meetings, then I would let somebody know, or because it's okay when stuff happens, like things come up, you're not able to always, your money might be down, you might have lost your job, might not be able to go on as many dates, or you might get sick and not be feeling it to get certain work done or show up in a meeting or whatever it may be. But hey, we've established an expectation that you will at least communicate. And so perhaps it is to think about, well, what do I have an expectation for? And then at what level is really what I'm looking for? It's just like that we're clear, or that we communicate, or that a thing happens. What are those bases? And so that is spoken. That is something that we talked about. They see it, we do it. I think in relationships, we often take for granted, like that people can read our mind and maybe don't speak about the expectations as much. But I think you should there as well. I think with family is probably where we probably speak them even less. Although when I think back about it now, like there's expectations like of my parents, like when we go out as a family, it's like, okay, you're not gonna be running around in the store, or like there's certain expectations, like that okay, this is how I should act in whatever circumstance or environment, or this is what will make them happy, or what they're looking for, what they appreciate. I feel like that didn't go both ways, so I don't know what that should probably look more like. But yeah, you really should communicate those things. But it's scary. I'm scared right now of like some things. So I'm trying to think about how this relates to me right now.
I I like that. And that was actually my next question is like how to set them. So communication is huge. Like, what are some indications that it is a thing that actually needs to be talked about versus these unspoken ones that we've kind of mentioned?
How do you what?
Yeah, how do you know that it's an expectation that needs to be communicated? I'm thinking mainly like in relationships or in relations with other people, not necessarily work. 'Cause I feel like most of that's more straightforward. But to your point about
Sometimes
like
it's not
family
though.
and friends,
Mhm.
okay, and work and relationships, like how do you know like when it's something that needs to be communicated and agreed upon versus something that we feel could be unspoken?
Mm, I think the only things that should have been unspoken are what you said, common decency and respect. Um, in a relationship, love, trust, admiration, respect. Without those things, like, how you do it and what you do needs to be communicated, but that has to be underlying foundational. And I think that's probably the only thing that can really be unspoken. Like you said, some things are obvious, breakers of those. Outside of that, you do have to talk about it because we're so different. And what somebody thinks is spending time, you might not feel is enough. Or, um, it might, to them, they might be like, oh, we're watching this movie. Like, we're spending time together. I'm doing this for you. They might genuinely think like, oh, I'm doing this because I know this is what you want to do. Meanwhile, you might be upset because it's like, oh, why do you keep pulling out your phone every 5 minutes? And you're like, you're not spending time with me. You're keep looking at the phone or you're scrolling. Well, they genuinely think they are. And so things like that is where you have to speak about the expectations of what does us time mean for me? What
Mm-hmm.
does that mean for you? And so communicating that, the how and the components, I guess, of those things is what you have to communicate.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Especially the misalignment of what we think is happening versus actually what is compared to somebody
Mhm.
else. And the phone was a great example. But also people whose love languages are quality time look very different than people's who are acts of service. Like they might not even care. They used to there watching the movie, like they mad you didn't help them carry the stuff upstairs and take out the trash or do whatever.
Yeah,
Um, and
yeah.
so the next piece is like actually I've realized I'm more scared about this part of the conversation than actually setting an expectation. So we talked about like setting expectations and kind of where that fear can come from. You don't want to be disappointed. But what happens like what do you do when expectations aren't met? And it could be in different areas if you have examples of like relationships or a job, like people where you work with.
If my expectations aren't met,
Hmm. Like
what
how
do
do
I
you handle
do?
it when your expectations aren't met?
Well, I think the easiest thing I could start to answer that with is how it feels when your expectations aren't met.
Mm,
I feel like I can feel betrayed or sad or start to feel resentful if it's something that happens often or if I feel like it's happening often, I'm not speaking up, which again, I think the communication on this is a two-way street. Um, and so what do I do? I'm so now I am better at managing them to where I really do have to consider. And sometimes I think maybe too much, right? Like sometimes we justify too much for another person, but I have plenty of notes on my phone as far as like relationship wise, where it's like, all right, well, same example. Well, he did take his time out to do, XYZ, even though, might have got upset about that, right? So it's like, well, let me reframe my perspective to better acknowledge what is happening, what I like, because that will beget more of the actual even just like the positivity or negativity of the space because of like you being mad about something or resentful for something like changes things, right? It makes people feel like, well, they can never do enough, so why would I keep even
mhm.
trying? And then you kind of like spiral into this space where y'all don't talk or like just don't care anymore or whatever. So I do think it's important where to focus on like, okay, what is happening, and to make sure you're giving acknowledgement for those particular things. um and then I would say probably would just need to communicate what you would like to be seeing or show that or talk about as much as you can. Hopefully, you're in a safe space of being able to communicate those things. Um, but that also requires, like we said, like listening to if they say, like, okay, but like I literally like I have ADHD, I want to be on my phone too. If I'm on my phone, like I just don't want you to take that personal or whatever. And there's a balance because sure, it's like, all right, well, if I'm saying I want this, then that's still what I want. And so perhaps can you notice that this person does start to leave their phone in the room a little bit more? It might not be every time y'all watch something, because I mean you might be watching something every day. And that's a real example for me is like, well, oh, I do notice like you're starting to put it down more. And so let me, reinforce that or let me show that I noticed that and I appreciate that or whatever. um, so yeah, managing them, perspective, talking about it, actually listening to what they're saying. They might be seeing it different. And then I would say both of you just trying to have um, a little more give and take around it. Um, and hopefully you can at least see, hey, that expectation of you caring about what I said is at least being shown sometimes when you do put that effort into what I would expect or what I'm expecting or would like to see. And you also being like, okay, but also I know that you want to do something else. So sometimes I don't have to say nothing when you pull out your phone. I don't got to say something every time. So it's still if both people can kind of be moving together like that, I guess in this like a relationship type of example, I think that's how I move with it. Or if my expectations aren't being met, trying to think of what other expectations I would have. I don't think I probably do, but I don't think I tend to make many expectations of people like that without
Mhm.
anything being spoken or said. I don't, because I don't like when people do that to me. I feel I really
Yeah.
actually hate when people do that to me. And they just start expecting something like that really like kind of blows me. So I don't really do that of others.
Yeah, entitlement is, like I said, one of my biggest pet peeves, and I feel like that kind of translates into expectations if I have to show up a certain way or do certain things. So random people, I do not. I really like your example in relationships and how it's kind of a give and take. It's not always like just this way or that way. I have an interesting like thought about so my expectations for myself. I feel like that's where I've struggled a lot because in my life I expect myself to always show up as like this perfect A1 version of myself, and then I get disappointed because I let myself down. And so
Mhm.
um I've had to really adjust those and like, am I doing the best I can in this moment? And sometimes that's no. Sometimes it's like, all right, I need to do better or I can do these things. But in this journey with myself, I've had to really learn how to manage my expectations with myself because I it used to be like a constant, like this vicious cycle of me expecting me to show up perfect, do the best work, always be the happiest person, always do this stuff. And I was like, girl, nobody does that. Like, can we just live life a
Mm.
little bit and enjoy it? And so that's really for me where I guess like what my focus has been that and then probably relationships as well. But just like learning how to be kinder to myself and really manage my expectations of myself.
With your expectations of yourself, what were you measuring that up against? Like how did you know if your expectations weren't met or if they were met?
They were never met because I always expected myself to be perfect. So even if I did really good, like in my head, my imposter syndrome or that like little voice in the back of my head would always nitpick something. It's like, oh, you did all this, but you forgot to call your mama today, or you did it.
Mm.
You know, you knocked this project out of the park, but you could have did better on that one slide. And it's like, girl, like don't like take your time to not like pick apart yourself, but then also even anytime when I would, you know, be there for a friend or all of the things that I'm doing, it would just be me like picking myself apart, like this narrative that I'm supposed to be perfect, but I would never measure up to that because nobody does.
Yeah, and nobody measures up to anything to me because I do expect everybody to be perfect. Now that we say this, actually, I was thinking about this maybe yesterday or maybe a few days ago, but I really do expect like perfection, and it makes it's very easy for me to not judge, but like to not get into a person, like, and this could not even relationship stuff, but like just even in general because of anything that's not perfect. And so it kind of keeps me a little distant from people. I probably I probably also, of course, like look at myself in the same way too, but also I'm not often very like upset at myself for not doing something or if something's not perfect. And so because of that, I'm trying to not expect that from other people, but I do like that's what's like I never like anybody, or like they never really catch my attention or anything because I'm like it's just I just see all these things. So that's an interesting point too, is that like you're always gonna fail. You're never gonna see possibilities with other people if you're expecting perfection. Like, and sometimes we use that, I think, as a way to never move forward. Like with relationships, you may always, you've seen people like that where it's like there's always something wrong with the person they went on the date with or whatever. And so it's like, okay, you don't want to like move forward because like why are you holding yourself back? Because you know you'll never find somebody that's perfect. Although there could be lots of reasons why you don't, move forward with a person, but sometimes it is like, okay, what am I actually just being scared of? So maybe if your expectations are super high, maybe that does show a fear of something. I wonder, could that make sense?
It definitely does. I think that if there is a consistent pattern in anything, and I'll use it with your example for expectations. So like if you're trying, like you want a life partner or someone to date, but every person you're dating has an issue, like there's probably something deeper. It's probably not just that. Like they might have
Mhm.
issues and it's probably something deeper. So anytime you notice like a pattern in your life, I think it's worth exploring a little bit below the surface. But that's not saying that there's not something wrong with everybody, because all of us have at least one thing.
Yeah.
But also question, like, what's the difference between high expectations and unrealistic? Like what's the marker, what's the difference? Like at what point does it teeter into unrealistic versus just being high?
Hmm. What is high expectations actually? I guess that's what I was trying to think about, is to have a high expectation is like, wow, I really think that this girl's probably really smart. Um, and so, but unrealistic. Hmm. I, I think maybe unrealistic expectations the only thing that really sounds unrealistic to me is perfection, or for there to be no issue with something,
Mhm.
right? Like we literally all have like too many issues in like any kind of space, like, so I think that's where it's unrealistic, where you're just expecting perfection, but I think we do more often than not. What about you? Is there anything else you would say about what could be unrealistic outside of that?
I think I think anytime we start to put people on a pedestal a little bit, it can be an unrealistic expectation. It kind of veers into perfection as well. But I think another unrealistic expectation is not expecting people to be perfect, but expecting them to show up in a way you want them to always.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that that's super unrealistic for anybody.
Yeah.
We're human, like anybody, but
So
for thinking that they'll respond in a way that's in alignment with how you view things or how you think things. But basically, people playing characters in your world, like that's
So
kind of unrealistic.
an unrealistic expectation could be perfection. An unrealistic expectation could be that somebody's going to do what you do, or think the way you think. For sure, that's definitely unrealistic, because it's, man, we're so different. Like I'll be blown how different people are, because I'm like, why are you not seeing this the way I see it? Like I don't understand. Like I do not understand. So that is good. I think that makes sense as well. But then high expectations, I think it's okay to have a high expectation for particular things, but again, it kind of just like depends on what it is. Like I might have a high expectation that um like mine are less like exact things and more about like I would have a high expectation that you would like be courteous to me to a certain level. Like if we were going on a first date or something like that, I would have a high expectation of um I don't know, certain things like about the way you would approach things or maybe do things, maybe. Um,
Mhm.
but I don't know what a regular expectation is. So also I'm not sure if that's high, but I know there's low expectations. I think that's easier to define. Because I feel as though a low expectation or not having expectation of people um is just that, like whatever happens is what's happens. I don't really have a something that I'm looking for out of it. And sometimes that can be smarter. I think maybe a lot of times that could be smarter, because you can have a low expectation or no expectation, and then whatever happens, still analyze that, say like, I'm not feeling that. So maybe like having a lower expectation out of people allows them to actually show you more of who they are. I just don't know how you have low or no expectations, because it's just like, it sounds good, but I think we very often have expectations. Like there's very few situations that we could be like, oh, I don't have any expectation, because you do. Even I think about it all the time, and I know we've talked about it before, is like, even like when you give somebody a gift, or like say something to somebody, you like high key, it's like, damn, I'm expecting them to actually be hyped. Like if they're not hyped about it, it's like, well, that was trash. But also it's like, well, damn, did you give it to them for that, or did you just want to get them something? You know what I mean? But like we often have expectations of how people react to us. um uh what happens, like, oh, I'm not gonna talk to you for a week, and but I'm really hoping like you say something to me, or like you're like, oh, I miss you, or whatever, right? Like so many times we have these expectations, even if we say we don't. So I think the biggest thing is just to not lie to yourself about it as well, or be very clear with yourself about what you do expect, and then that's where you can manage it. Like, should it be higher, lower? I don't even know how you make it lower. We could talk about that too, but yeah, identify what it is.
Yeah, I see a lot of commentary around like having no expectations or low expectations is better because then you can't get let down. Or, if you have no expectations, you'll always win because it can't get, worse, or going in like, kind of reminds me of like expecting the worst, always expecting the worst so that you're
I
not
think
really
that's
like let
different
down.
though. Is that different to have a low expectation versus expecting the worst? Is
I
different.
think so. I can see, yes, that's different. It reminds me kind of the same thing though. It's like, and I don't know if I agree with the mindset. It's like, oh, let me have no expectations, which, like you said, I think most people are lying because we all do have them, even if we say we don't. But I think that, like, I don't think there's anything wrong also with getting disappointed. And I think maybe that's my thing, is like people try so hard to like not get let down or not get disappointed. And I think that it's inevitable. Like at some point, somebody's going to let us down and they're going to hurt our feelings. So why not have your expectations? Again, I don't know how we define like high or low or whatever, but I don't necessarily agree with having low or no expectations of things. Like I really expect great things in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because to me it's different to say I expect the worst. That's having high expectations of negative things. So I think that's different. But um I think lowering expectations scientifically, though, they've said like that makes you happier, or people are happier. And mostly because, like we were kind of alluding to before, you're not already setting something that has to be fulfilled. Like you're leaving more space for things to just happen. And if something happens that you
Mm.
don't agree with, don't like, you're not coming from up here to down here. It's just you're in the same place. And you're just like, oh, okay, I see this. And now what? Like it doesn't have to be a drop, like, that coming down off of a high or something where it's like, oh damn, now I'm blown. It's just allowing things to be what they are.
Isn't
There's
that having low
reasonable
expectations
assumption,
though?
and then there's entitlement.
Ah, there we go. I like that. I also think like, I think that that's a yes and. Like I don't think that's necessarily just low expectations. Like I think you can have expectations, reasonable expectations, and allow things to be where they
Yeah.
are, perhaps.
Yeah. But also I think that we place certain expectations on other people, because we assume like that we're similar. And so to have expectations at a certain level doesn't really allow people to show you who they are, or maybe what's really happening is you're putting blinders on yourself of what's really happening. So you are kind of setting yourself up because you're trying to see a thing instead of just being more open to seeing it what it really is. So if you're trying to see a certain thing,
Ooh.
then now there's something attached to if I see it or not, and now you're kind of going down like a different spiral, because we're not the same.
Oh, that's spicy. I like that. That's a good thing. And I think it is more about what we're trying to see. But let's talk about that then. How do we, or can we, approach life and relationships and things in a way where we're not trying to see a certain thing? Is that
Yeah.
realistic? Can we do that?
Yeah, because I think there's ways to lower your expectations or to practice that. Based off even some of the things we've just said, you can lower expectations by giving more without expecting to receive something. And that can be without somebody getting hype, without them expressing anything to you or whatever, like, and I don't know, maybe there's a way to maybe anonymously give or do something, or just practicing that where it doesn't there nothing happens. You're just doing it. So that's one way that you can. What's another way you
I
can
think you
lower
can.
expectations?
I I think, and I won't even use the word lower expectations. I'll say more so like taking off your blinders to make things like feel a certain way or to like appear a certain way to you. But I have agape tattooed on me because it's like loving unconditionally. So not even just giving, but like loving just to love. So in
Mhm,
the same sense of like giving gifts, I think sometimes people be like, I love you because they want to hear it, not because they love the person necessarily. And so practicing like acts of love and loving and trying like to not have a reaction like depending on what happens afterwards. So
mhm,
just loving just to love and trying to let go of your attachment to whatever happens afterwards
mhm.
and trying to loose yourself of maybe any expectations.
I think another way to be able to kind of lower your expectations, especially of like a family member or a close friend, can be to branch out more, to talk to other people instead of kind of like expecting that, okay, Carlie's always going to listen to your event, or um, even like in your relationship or whoever, that if you can minimize the pressure on like people being everything and doing the most, which we tend to do in our relationships, if you spread that out a little bit more. And involve other people in your life, like start to like really build more of a tribe so that you do have different folks that you can go to about different things instead of like a partner feeling like they have to be everything, which they can't.
Mm, mm-mm. No, that's, I think that's a great one. And we can't be anybody's everything, or, and hopefully we're at the point in our life where we're not expecting anybody to be our everything either. Outside of ourselves. I think another good one is to be curious. So instead of like wanting things to go a certain way, like a conversation, or already thinking you know how somebody feels or thinks about a certain thing, just be curious. Like when you're talking about things, like asking them more questions, giving them space to be who they are instead of who you already think they are in your head, allowing them to show up differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing that I remember reading before is that expectations is one-sided. Um, it's like a what is it? It's like a one-sided emotion, and it doesn't have any significance for the other party. So like sometimes it can be something that like you have it and you're like it really is just fulfilling or bothering you based on whichever way it goes, but like it's not even necessarily considering like the other person all the time. So that kind of goes back to the communication as well. Like if you notice yourself maybe blown over an expectation, or if you notice you're expecting something like, dang, like Dan call me today or whatever, then I would say to start paying more attention to when you feel like that, like if expectations not being met, identify it as that. And now like start to think about like how or if you've communicated what you do want, to then go through that checklist of like, okay, well actually he's saying this, or let me manage them. I remember I dated somebody years ago where like I was always one like, just trying to talk more. They would be like on set or not as available. But also they were just unavailable because I'm like this too. Anybody who tries to blow me up too much, like I get a little more distant. But he'll always be like, yo, like I can't always like respond. I'm not gonna always like hit you back. Or like sometimes like you might hit somebody and they hit you the next day or whatever. Um, and then you just have to kind of like bring that up or talk about it. If you want something different, you have to talk about that. But then you have to listen what they say, like, hey, I'm not always gonna do XYZ. Like I have a million other things, whatever, cool. And then you have to manage your expectations to where you can either whether you're like, you know what, yeah, like sometimes I don't always want to respond back either, or I have things to do, cool. Or if you're like, well, you know what, I can always stop and make the time. Like I can at least be like, hey, I'm busy right now, I'll hit you back later. Whatever you wherever you're at is fine. But then you need to from that moment of managing that, then be like, oh, well, this isn't that person for me. Or, okay, I could try that where I fall back a little bit and just chill. But if it takes you out of having to be who you are, now it's like that power imbalance or manipulation or whatever, it starts to go into place too. So with communicating your expectations, it's important to not just manage them, but then to be honest with yourself about, and this goes back to what we said at the very beginning about the boundaries. Be honest with yourself about like if you're okay with that person being who they are. And so I think that's where things get weird, because then we like twist and turn and like twist ourselves up in all these different positions to try to be okay for something else, where it's like you're just getting more and more mad or whatever, and it just doesn't end up well. So that's the biggest thing I think to learn and to do, is to listen when expectations aren't the same.
Yeah, and to be okay to walk away if it doesn't fit who you are. And I feel like that's really the start of it, is to know who you are and what you want, so that you're not twisting yourself and trying to fit yourself like a square peg in a round hole. You're trying to fit yourself in places where you don't need to be, or trying to make someone else fit your vision of what you want them to be in
Mhm.
your life, but obvious that they don't. I also think that if you are in a situation where, anybody in your life where you feel like you can't have that conversation, then they might not be the right people in your life. Because people who care about you can have that conversation. They might not give you the answer that you want,
Yeah.
but you would still be able to be safe and vulnerable enough to have that conversation with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you do need to check yourself and your expectations of like, oh, I am expecting too much. Excuse me, because that's the same thing that I got on somebody else about too. So it's like weird how sometimes you're on one side and sometimes you're on the other side. And it really all depends about like where that person, um, who they are to you, where they are to you, at what point. Like we just met, and I remember I had this guy, like we had just hung out like one time, and he started like texting me a lot, and I was like, okay, I would respond when I could respond. But then I think he said something like, "Oh, you're not gonna say good morning to me this morning," or something. He texted something like that, where it was like it started to make me feel like entitled, and I was like, yeah, like now, now I was like that, and I ain't like that. I'm like, bro, like I don't know what you think this is, but to me, it's not nothing right now. I just, like I just hung out with you, I'll, getting to know you, whatever. But I'm not about to be rolling over saying good morning every day, because I just don't, I don't, honestly, I don't care at this point yet about all that. And then there's of course those times when I am going to be the person where I'm like, man, you don't never say good morning, like I think about you when I first wake up. You don't think about me when you first wake up. But like, so you could be on both sides very easily, and it just depends on what it is and where you are with things. Um, but yeah, I don't know, man. You gotta take it chill. You gotta chill out with new people. Let it play out.
Man, you gotta let things play out. And also, it's so funny because you also don't know where you fall in other people's expectations. I'm not gonna say it again, but I hate entitlement. But I had a homeboy that I met, cool, nothing crazy, whatever. We text a
Mhm.
little bit sometimes, left it alone. This man came out of left field one day, because I was like, "Oh, happy birthday, fam!" Like I saw it was his birthday or
Not
something. I
fam.
read something random like a
I got
holiday.
you curved up. Happy
Look,
birthday, friend.
I make stuff real clear. I don't play with people's emotions. I don't sell no
Aw.
dreams. I let you know what's up. But I said that, and he was like, "Yeah, last summer we was doing all this flirting and da 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 da, and nothing ever came from it." And I was like, "Huh?
Man.
Like, bro, no, but I wasn't even flirting with you. I called you like I was very clear in my verbiage, or at least I thought I was. Like, I what we weren't, huh? Like, so he had all these expectations, and this one turned into something that I was completely oblivious to. Like, I had no
Right.
idea. But then he was kind of like a little weird. So now I'm like, oh, I'm never telling you happy birthday again. 'Cause
Right.
that shit was weird.
That was weird.
So
Yeah.
also like,
So
so also
basically,
check
you ain't sent on
yourself,
no
fam.
birthday nudes. I see. I see.
Absolutely not. And yeah, check them expectations, fam. And that's me to me too, and other people's. But yeah, you got to make sure people understand what's going on.
But on the flip side, that's another kind of maybe unfortunate casualty to expectations, that I've had conversations with um my guy family members, guy friends, where we talk about like, man, it almost, I hate this, but it almost feels like you can't be too nice to a girl, because then it's like, well, now they started expecting all this, but it's like, I mean, I don't want to treat you bad, but also it doesn't mean like, I want to be exclusive with you or we're dating necessarily, whatever, right? Like, and I'm like, yeah, it goes the other way as well, where it's unfortunate that I feel like, I can't be too nice, or like, like it shouldn't necessarily be that way. And yet we know that sometimes because of how you treat folks, that they already do start to build up particular expectations, or they see that, then that might mean something like, oh, he said hello to me today, and so that must mean like XYZ. So it can be difficult to maneuver from both sides. And but I'm not encouraging people to be an asshole or like be rude just so you don't have people have expectations. But um yeah, I think it's sometimes unfortunate. There's a lot to think about in that way, and as opposed to just like, can we just be nice? And if for things to be clear, if it's doing something else, let's be clear about it. If I'm not being clear about it, then it's probably not that. But again, everybody thinks differently. We've done it too, where like guys say a certain thing a certain way, or hangs out every day, like, oh, he likes me, and then you might not hear from him for a while. It's like, oh, never mind. Like, you just never really know. So you just can't make assumptions. You can't have the expectations if you haven't spoken about it.
I think that's so huge. And I'm trying to build a table right now. I know it connects, I promise. But I'm trying to build this table. I saw it on TikTok. It's super cool. But I've been looking for these pavers, these little square cement pavers. I went to like 5 stores yesterday. And finally, at this last store, they were about to close, and they're like, "We ain't got them." But a guy who was there was like, "Yo, you looking for pavers? I heard you say you familiar." So he was like, "I'm so sorry. I'm not trying to be
Mhm.
creepy. I promise. I just overheard you." But I thought about it. I was like, "Oh man, he apologized for being nice because of like that whole like I don't want to be creepy, but like I'm trying to help you out." And this man gave me favors for free. So shout out to
Mhm.
him. Shout out to my homeboy, Brendan. um, but yeah, just making sure you communicate. The last thing I want to talk about, when Lexi and I were prepping this episode, we were like thinking about tweets that we've had on expectations and quotes and
Mhm.
different things. And there's a quote that we've all heard in business, and it's undersell and over deliver. And I
Mhm.
wanted to talk a little bit about expectations and manipulation because I think that that's an important topic as well. So, how you feel about undersell and over deliver?
I think it would be better to say this is what you're gonna get, and then give people what they're gonna get. Um, as opposed to making it a tactic where you're gonna do a little bit more anyway, right? Like if you do more, then cool, you do more. But to say, oh, you're gonna get 5 of these things when you're really gonna do 10, like, I don't know, that's just trying to like set people up to look at you and your work a certain way, which I just don't think you necessarily need to do. So for me, I'm more a fan of just do what you say you're gonna do, as opposed to making things kind of a game, which I think that does a little bit of.
Yeah, and I think people use that mentality in relationships and in other things too. So just be a person of your word. Don't be out here
Mhm.
manipulating folks, trying to lower expectations, knowing
Yeah,
what you actually gonna do versus that.
yeah, like you don't have to undersell it to make regular look good. Like just do what you're supposed to do. Um, and I think that also appeals to well, if you're talking about outside of work too, like in relationships, things like that, I think that appeals to a certain type of person to undersell, and then like they may be a pleaser or kind of a little more needy or dependent or whatever, so they want to like try to fix you, and they want to, and I'm saying that also as a person who's been in that space too, where it's like, oh man, I don't feel right being around people who don't give me anything to do. Like if I don't have no challenge here, what am I doing? um so like it also kind of puts you in a certain cycle with particular types of folks that you probably don't want to be in, or like that's still like kind of playing games a little bit. So like just cut all that stuff out and just say like, yeah, this is what it is, and let that be what it is, instead of kind of playing around.
Yeah. I was like, so hit us at Carlie's Couch. Let us know your thoughts on expectations, how you manage them in your life. I'm down to hear some funny stories about whenever you have
Mhm.
mismanaged them, as we have both shared some. Make sure you sign up for our newsletter at carlyscouch.com. And then the question of the week, Lex, what do you think slash hope happens when we die?
um I don't really hope anything, I think we just disappear and like we're just gone. I think we're just here one day and then we're just gone. Nothing really creative there. I
I
don't
mean,
really
that's
think we
it.
get reincarnated. I don't think that there's an afterlife. Um yeah, I think we need those things to explain to us why we're here and to give us kind of like some kind of purpose or something, which I don't know. I think it's not that deep actually.
Mm. I like that. Part of me believes that, and then the other part of me wonders. It's like you hear all these stories about these kids who like are like, oh, I was so and so in a past life.
Mhm.
Like, oh, I got murdered this way, and they go back and like, oh man, this person actually did get murdered that way. So I just wonder if there is some truth to people are like, oh, this isn't their first time here. They're an old soul, and that we do
Mhm.
have some type of purpose that we need to like complete before our souls are done here. Meaning that like you might not remember, but you were this person one time, you were on this continent a different time until you kind of fulfill that purpose. I'm not sure, but I'm kind of
One thing
partially
I
where Lexi is and
noticed,
partially there.
one thing I noticed is that every time we be like, "Oh, this person, he got an old soul. He been here." That just mean that baby was raised by their grandparents half the time. Like, like half the time, it's like, let's actually dig deeper. Oh, you were raised by older people. I'm not. I'm not even trying to be funny, but it's like, yeah, who you grew up around, like, is why you are over here using whatever phrases you using and acting like you acting. But I'm sure there's always, when it comes to the afterlife and like stories about people who die and come back, there's so many different stories about things they saw and whatever. Um, and I think that maybe we do like there is some type of maybe time of seeing or experiencing something between like last breath and like whatever, but I don't think we're just like roaming around. I don't think we go anywhere like that or um yeah, not necessarily. Have you ever seen a ghost?
I haven't seen one. I don't doubt that they exist, but I haven't ever seen one. Have you?
Mm-mm. No, I've never seen a ghost or
Mm-mm.
experienced that, but I know 12 stories about that too. So perhaps that would what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of
Negate,
determine like what
disprove.
your thoughts are about what happens or, what we are and who we are and things like that. But I've never had those experiences.
Yeah, me neither. I'm also not a ghost chaser like my cousins like to do all that stuff, like
Yeah.
going to haunted places. And when I was little, because I'm the baby, like by 6 years, they used to try to bring me around to scare me to death. So they
Hmm.
completely killed any part of me that have ever been curious about that stuff.
Hmm.
So yeah, I would like to know kind of what y'all think happens whenever we die too. Hit us at Carlie's couch and let us know.
I guess I should say goodbye.
I was
Bye,
like, did it
y'all.
freeze?
Have a good day. I don't know why I thought you were gonna say something else. But yeah, what she said, let us know what you thought about the episode, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah. Bye, y'all.